Yes, I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Pastor Arthur Porter. You're back there? And yes, so he is the senior pastor of the New Nation Church of God in Christ, right here in Aurora, Colorado. Dr. Porter, he's been the pastor for 17 years, and he carries on an impressive family tradition. Six generations? Seven generations of ministering to the flocks. So that's amazing. 7 now. So his church's vision is to empower 10,000 families to prosper, one family at a time. So Dr. Porter is also the founder of One Accord Ministries International, an empowerment movement highlighting the intersection of family prosperity and home ownership. So you are an inspiration, Dr. Porter. We appreciate you being here to talk about the importance of whole life advocacy and sharing your work with us. And I know that your family is back there too.
They're all back there.
Thank you for coming.
The steps. All right, good thing I had my exercise this morning. Hello, everybody. Hello. When Denise called me sometime, I think in January, and when she told me that she would like for me to speak at Democrats for Life, I thought, what? So it piqued my interest. And I always like to hear about people who are fighting for life, and people who are willing to win, and wherever death has staked a claim, that they're willing to step in and become life givers. And so I'm delighted to be here tonight. When we're talking about whole life advocacy, it's difficult many times in our culture today, which I believe is a culture of death. I believe that it is a culture that refuses to deal with the disease and only wants to treat the symptom. One of the ways to avoid whole life issues is to keep treating the symptom while the disease remains untreated. When you go to the hospital, they don't treat the fever. They treat the disease, because the fever is the symptom. And if they cure the disease, then the symptom will take care of itself. The critical issue issues related to human life and dignity require us to treat the disease that causes injustice and robs people of their dignity. Every life is sacred because we are created in God's image. America has a disease, and America keeps treating the fever, which is the symptom of the disease. Our inability to protect the sanctity of life and the unborn is a fever. Poverty is a fever. Low wages is a fever. Euthanasia is a fever. Inadequate work environments is a fever. Unaffordable health care, a fever. Inadequate and unaffordable housing is a fever. The for-profit prison industrial system is a fever. The mistreatment of immigrants is a fever. And a host of other things is a fever. We are treating the fever. When the disease that I want to talk about this evening is the disease of racism. And racism is about economic greed. You cannot have predatory capitalism without racism. The disease that America was built on is the economic system of chattel slavery. Everything from Wall Street to the large multinational corporations of America and Western Europe were financed because the economic system of chattel slavery. Slavery was the economic engine that funded modern capitalism, and the wealth that labor generated built America's national economy. Slavery made America the wealthy, powerful world leader it is, including its institutions of banking, business, education, and religion. There is a plaque on Wall Street in New York City that recognizes slavery's role in the creation of American capitalism. The transatlantic slave trade built the foundation for the modern capitalism and corporate behemoths throughout the world. Lehman Brothers, whose business empire started in the slave trade. Aetna, Inc., the United States' largest health insurer. J.P. Morgan Chase financed and profited from the slave trade. New York Life Insurance sold insurance policies on enslaved African Americans. Wachovia Corporation and Wells Fargo, N.M. Rothschild and Son, Norfolk Southern, USA Today, and E.W. Strips and Gannett Broadcasting Company, Fleet Boston, Providence Bank, CSX, the Canadian National Railway, Mobile and Ohio, Brown Brothers Harriman, Brooks Brothers, Barclays, AIG, and many others all got their financial foundation from the slave trade. Listen, humanity is like an enormous spider web, so that if you touch it anywhere, you set the whole thing trembling. Even after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, our government reneged on the promise of 40 acres and a mule. So thousands of slaves remained enslaved for many years, even up until 1960. Then came Jim and Jane Crow. After that came the war on drugs. After that came the racist sentencing laws. And then came Reagan and Thatcher with their neoliberalism theology, or ideology, rather than theology, ideology. Data proves that Trump supporters are more motivated by racism than economic issues. I know it's difficult to accept that millions of our fellow Americans voted for Trump because of bigotry, not economics. However, deflection from the implicit and explicit racism leaves us only treating the symptom and not the disease. There are those who want to hurry along into a post-racial American society, America's penchant for cultural diversity and the illusion of colorblindness, or class, not race myth. But America will continue to have poverty, low wages, euthanasia, inadequate work environments, unaffordable health care, inadequate and unaffordable housing, for-profit prisons, unjust sentencing laws, mistreatment of immigrants, and a host of other systematic issues. As long as the disease of racism is left untreated and uncured. I hope and pray that the day will come in America when freedom, liberty, and justice is achieved for everyone in our society in a way that upholds the full dignity and respect for everyone in America. And people will desire the same freedom and justice and fairness for others that they want to claim for themselves. Let me tell you where I'm coming from philosophically. I do not believe that racism and classism are the same. Neither do I believe that classism has replaced racism. I believe that racism is the disease, and that classism, predatory capitalism, and violence in all of its forms and all of its symptoms is a disease of racism. I believe that they are systematically and systemically planned and designed to divide and conquer. And within them, there are three issues. First, white supremacy and the hierarchy of haves, which is the dominant group, and have-nots, which are the subordinated groups. Secondly, the promise, myth, mockery, dogma, and sham of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and individualism in American society. And then thirdly, the systemic and systematic oppression of subordinated people of color and poor whites to the advantage and strengthening of the dominant white group. These three factors work together to keep America in a protracted and persistent plantation system, birthed at Jamestown. I know America likes to think of itself as Plymouth Rock, and life, liberty, and happiness, that American great experience. However, America is not Plymouth Rock. America is Jamestown. The fact speaks for themselves. Can you all hear me? The mic went out on me. The facts speak for themselves. Racial resentment was and is the cause of Trump. And our reluctance to acknowledge that bigotry and intolerance of that bigotry is what perpetuates racism. And as a result, classism and oligarchy. We had the first black president in American history, followed by a racist, misogynist bigot. And we still don't want to talk about race. People say, let's make it about class. Or let's make it about the Democrats being dysfunctional and not ready. Or let's make it about something about the Republicans. But we have bought into the mythology that America was once a great country. America has never been great. Not for all Americans. For some, it's been great, but not for all of us. I touched the hand that touched the slave. My great uncle, who had a hog farm in Nowata, Oklahoma, reached out his hand to me. And he said, boy, take my hand. And I took his hand. And he said, these are the hands that put lotion on one of our relatives' back. He said, years after slavery, I had to take lotion and take oil, and I had to put lotion and oil on his back because of the whip of the slave whip on his back. If I can touch a hand physically that touched a slave, then I can touch it spiritually, and I can touch it emotionally. What Heidi Nash calls the body space of the psyche. Thank you. and the unconscious domain outside of language, suppressed into the subconscious, harvesting the tragedy that happened to my ancestors. All of the pain and trauma continues to be repressed. In Jamestown, American Indians were exploited for their land. Europeans, some enslaved, some indentured servants, all of them poor, were exploited along with African Americans. Their lives as workers were controlled by the Dutch Indian Company. In order to make more profits, the Dutch West Indian Company wanted free labor. It was the beginning of extreme legal, systemic, and systematic racism in America. Until 1619, there were no such thing as race. Before slavery started, there were no white people in America. There were no black people. There were no brown people in America. Racism is about economics. Slavery was not a Southern problem. It was and it is an American problem. And the creator and sustainer of white supremacy's roots. The history and exploitation and oppression of African Americans began with the exploitation and oppression of all people in general, and African Americans and Native Americans in particular. Theodore Allen asserts that the commonality of experience and demonstrated solidarity between African American and European American laboring people, and the lack of a substantial intermediate buffer social control stratum, and the intermediate status of African Americans was a threat to the ruling elite and its own class interests to build wealth and establish social control. He goes on to say that the white race was invented as a ruling class social control formation in response to labor solidarity as manifested in the labor and social similarities and relationships between African Americans and European Americans. The legal system, politics, and religion, which are controlled by the rich and powerful, has always been used to keep the poor and minorities oppressed and African Americans enslaved. The rich controlled the laws, and by 1665, Maryland and New York had legalized slavery. Chattel slavery, an American original, was instituted by law to exploit and enslave African Americans for profit, rendering African Americans less than human and reduced to property, having no rights, dignity, or humanity. Religion was used along with the system of law and politics to keep African Americans enslaved. According to W.E.B. Du Bois, slavery was not a necessity for the extraction of resources from the New World, but the European expediency and efficiency, their need for that at any cost, was the main justification for the use of slaves in America. The greed and disregard for humanity was the catalyst for a system that delivered untold damage to both the African American and the American psyche. Toni Morrison says this: for new immigrants, the move into the mainstream America always means buying into the notion of African Americans as the real aliens. Whatever the ethnicity or nationality of the immigrant, his or her nemesis is understood to be African American. It doesn't matter what shade the newcomer's skin is. A hostile posture toward the resident African Americans must be struck at the Americanizing door before it will be opened. One of the most oppressive and cunning tricks played on the minds of African Americans and poor whites was to get each group to view the others as the primary threat. Du Bois suggests that white elites discovered that white working classes who were starting to rebel against class domination in Europe and America could be held in check by convincing whites that they were racially superior to workers of color across the globe. Does that sound familiar? I call that Trumpism. The divide and conquer methods are what is being used by elites in society today. This is the methods through which the capitalist elites gain wealth by manipulating and exploiting the working class. In order for whole life advocacy to succeed, the slave labor plantation system must be transformed into a truly fair and equitable economic, political, education, and religious system that values all people. A system where the dignity and value of human life is prioritized and promoted. And economic and social policies enables all human life to flourish. We must advocate for pro-racial equality so that the majority of Americans will no longer be misled, lied to, and manipulated by the oligarchs. We must refuse to be recruited into stories, conversations, behaviors, and politics designed by the oligarchs to divide and conquer us. The promise of life, liberty, and happiness must become a reality for all people. We need organizations and institutions that are committed to racial equality, that are controlled and facilitated by people who are committed to racial equality. Because the majority of Americans continue to choose racism over righteousness and profits over people. We need pro-racial equality establishments, including religious institutions, churches. We need pro-racial equality politics, banking, education, including city, state, and national governments that are truly dedicated to the uprising of all Americans. Pro-racial equality is about creating and establishing institutions and communities where all people are represented in leadership, where all people are leaders and not subordinate to the dominant group. Pro-racial equality is wanting for everyone else what we want for ourselves. I truly hope and pray that the day will come in America when freedom, liberty, and justice is achieved for everyone in our society in such a way that it upholds the full dignity and respect for everyone in America. And people will desire the same freedom, justice, and fairness for others that they want to claim for themselves. Finally, the importance of racial equality is the significant connection that all Americans have with each other. Martin Luther King did not die because he was fighting for black folk. King did not die because he was marching for garbage collectors' rights. King died because he began to fight for justice and equality for all people. for stopping the violence of predatory capitalism, which was founded upon racism. If you only fight for body issues, you will only fight for race issues. If you will only fight to stop abortions, if you only fight against euthanasia, if you only fight for civil rights issues, against affordable health care, housing, the mistreatment of immigrants, or what anywhere else, they'll call you and label you as crazy, a tree-hugging progressive liberal. But if you will fight for justice and racial equality in an economic system that is steeped in racism and is operated and functions because of racial divide and conquer schemes, then you will be with great Americans like King, like Kennedy, and like others. King said the three evils of white supremacist hierarchical society is racism, predatory capitalism, and violence. Frederick Bruckner said, as we move around this world and as we act with kindness, perhaps, or with indifference, or with hostility toward the people we meet, we too are setting the great spider web a-tremble. The life that I touch for good or ill will touch another life, and that in turn another, until who knows where the trembling stops, or what far place in time my touch will be felt. Our lives are linked together. No one is an island. We are one human family, tied together by our struggle for a better life and a greater promise of hope. I end with quoting Dr. Martin Luther King. In a real sense, all life is interrelated. All men and women are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. Thank you.
Before you go, did anyone have any questions for Pastor? You can't. I'm not going to let you walk away that quickly. Was very. Does anybody have any questions for Pastor Porter?
How can we make the Democratic Party align with the values you speak of?
That's a big order. Perfect. We can all work on it together. What I propose is that we start at the beginning of our country and we begin again. And we transform politics, we transform our institutions, our government, even our religious institutions into one that desires justice and equality and fairness for everybody. And that I should desire the same dignity and rights for others that I desire for myself. I think that in that is what ties us together. Because many times we see ourselves as different and apart and separate. One of the reasons why many today, and I can speak for many that I know of in the African American community, are withdrawing from politics is because they don't see the interconnectedness. One of the reasons why so few people are voting, why we're losing a lot of people to apathy, is because they don't see the interconnectedness. What I tried to do in just a little while is just try to tell the story about how we are all interconnected. So I hope that answers your question. Anybody else?
Can you talk more about what we can learn from the eras of Roosevelt and Kennedy?
Well, a lot of those in that time, we know we lost Kennedy, we lost King, we lost Malcolm, we lost those who became enlightened because they grew past. Remember Martin at the end of his life, Harry Belafonte says that King leaned over to him and he said, you know, Harry, I believe we're going to get this integration thing. He said, but I regret that we shouldn't have asked for integration, we should have asked for inclusion. Because I'm afraid we're integrated into a burning house. What got them killed was to go after the economic issue, to go after the real power structure. Yes, yes, please.
It seems to me racial division is getting worse, more divisive, and more reactive, where distrust is growing even more. So what are some actual things we can do to stem this flow and recognize our commonalities?
So we have to have conversations. One of the things that I know the city of Aurora has done and is doing, and the city of Denver is doing, is they have a racial committee. And so they come together and meet. Unfortunately, it's not well attended. It's not as many people, with all of the city of Aurora, it's not as many people in those meetings as there is here. But I believe we have to be intentional in forming groups and conversations of people who begin to re-edit and re-author these stories of America and make these stories what they truly are in such a way that we can transcend all of the barriers that we have in America. We have to change our mindset. We have to change it from one of division to one of equality. And when we begin to do that, the conversations change. We're able to see others as we see ourselves. And that's what joins us together. I think that's one of the solutions. Yes.
Is there a lot of awareness in the Black community of how abortion is targeted to women, and if this awareness seems to be growing or not? You may be aware of the open letter by clergy to Hillary Clinton regarding this injustice that she refused to answer.
I was a part of that group that sent that letter to her. Yes. So what we have as a result of economics is we have very broken family systems, very broken communities, people who are trying to survive economically anyway. So it's one of those things many times that happens without support, without people around them. Many of these people are already trying to make up their mind on economic issues. And so when you have another issue like taking care of a life, you have to come with more than just saying these are my values. You have to come with practicality and help. You have to put your arm around them and you got to spend some time with them. And once you put in them what they know is there anyway, because most people in my experience that I've dealt with that facing decisions about abortion, if they had a better option, they wouldn't do it. But there's panic, there's pressure, there's economic things. So again, it comes back to us being in relationship with each other and being in support of each other. And of course, many in the community of the African Americans understand that the number one aborted is the African American male. That's the face of abortion. Black folk. Yeah. So thank you for your question.
Can you say something about gentrification and housing for people of color?
Beautiful. Beautiful. I do think they're all interconnected. When I left Atlanta in 1994, came back to Denver, Susan Barnes-Gelt was on the council at that time. And I talked to her and I said, you know, gentrification is coming. And what can we do about it? This was in 1994. So how did I know that? I knew that because though I lived in Denver, I went to Atlanta for my graduate degree in theology. And it was at that seminary that they informed us that if you have churches and property in the inner city, do not sell it, do not give it up. The pressures was on to do that because if your church is in the inner city, everybody else is moving out. The people that live in the area of your church are being moved out. And so you become a drive-in church. And if you're not aware and intentional, you lose other resources of people and finances. So the biggest thing with gentrification and how it ties in is it's part and parcel the banks and the institutions, the education institutions informing people of what to do, the leaders of what to do, leadership training, and how to sustain a community, how to be the right type of leader for people in community. But it's also about the banks and institutions that will come alongside and partner with those people in that community, and let them invest in that community. Just one more thing. When around my church, we're in 810 in Aurora. So where we're located as according to last year, we were the highest poverty in all of Colorado. Now all of the houses are and we stayed from 2000 all the way to now. So now the gentrification has gone on a lot. But what the cities did was they allowed people from California to come in, gave them money and loans to buy the houses around our church. One of the gentlemen who bought up about 50 houses in our community where I pastor at the church, he came to the church to ask me, do I have people in my church that want to rent from him? I said, I have people in my church that want to own them homes. But that option was not available. So again, it's institutional, it's from the top. You know, I can tell you many stories about that from gentrification, because that's one of our biggest pressing issues. Thank you.